A successful businessman gave his family Rolex watch to a homeless woman and her daughter. When he discovered that she was visiting the grave of someone he knew, he broke down, crying. Secrets from the past came to light and their lives changed. Forever in a way no one could have predicted. A story of music, redemption, and second beginnings. Get ready because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like on this video and comment where you are watching from. The April morning in New York City unfolded like countless others before it. Streams of pedestrians moved along the busy sidewalks of Manhattan, each person lost in their own world of deadlines and appointments. Among them walked Ethan Blackwood, his tailored Armani suit and confident stride, marking him as someone who belonged in the gleaming skyscrapers that dominated the skyline. As CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, one of the city's most prestigious investment firms, Ethan had built a reputation for ruthless efficiency and an uncanny ability to predict market trends. His colleagues called him the Iceman behind his back, a nickname he secretly took pride in. Emotion had no place in business, and at 45 he had made that philosophy the cornerstone of his success. The board meeting that morning had gone exactly as planned. Another acquisition completed, another company streamlined for maximum profit. The shareholders would be pleased with the quarterly report. These thoughts occupied Ethan's mind as he cut through Bryant Park on his way to lunch at the Yale Club. That's when he saw them. A woman in her early 30s sat on a bench, dressed in clothes that had once been of good quality, but now showed signs of wear. Beside her, a small girl of perhaps 7 or 8 years old held a tattered notebook, carefully drawing what appeared to be musical notes. Despite their circumstances, there was a quiet dignity about them that made Ethan pause. The woman looked up momentarily, meeting his gaze. Her eyes reflected not desperation, but a quiet resilience that struck him unexpectedly. In that brief connection, something stirred within Ethan, a recognition he couldn't place, a memory just beyond his grasp. Without fully understanding his own actions, Ethan approached them. The woman tensed slightly, instinctively drawing her daughter closer. "I'm sorry to intrude," Ethan said, his voice softer than usual. "Your daughter, she's writing music?" The woman nodded cautiously. "Lily has perfect pitch. She hears music in everything." The little girl looked up at him, her eyes bright with intelligence. "It's the song the fountain makes," she explained, pointing to the park's central fountain. "Nobody else hears it, but it's there." Something about the child's certainty shook Ethan deeply. In a gesture that would perplex him for days to come, he removed the Rolex watch from his wrist, the last gift from his grandfather before he passed away, a family heirloom worth more than most people earned in a year. "Please," he said, placing it in the surprised woman's hand. "Take this." The woman stared at the watch in shock. "Sir, I can't possibly—" "Please," Ethan repeated, already backing away, suddenly uncomfortable with his impulsive action. "Sell it. Use it. Whatever you need." Before she could respond, he turned and walked briskly away, losing himself in the midday crowd, his bare wrist feeling strangely lighter. The next morning, instead of heading to his office, Ethan found himself back at Bryant Park. He told himself he was just checking. A business transaction follow-up, nothing more. He spotted the woman and her daughter leaving the park and, maintaining a discreet distance, followed them. Their journey took them uptown to Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. Ethan watched from behind a large memorial as the woman and her daughter placed a small bundle of wildflowers at a modest grave. The simple gesture, performed with such care, stirred something in him, he thought, long buried. As they walked away, Ethan approached the grave. The name on the headstone struck him like a physical blow. Eleanor Thompson, 1960-2010. Eleanor. The name echoed in his mind, unleashing a flood of memories. 25 years earlier, fresh out of business school and working his first job at a struggling financial firm, Ethan had been assigned a project under Eleanor Thompson, then a rising star in investment banking. She had taken the brash young man under her wing, showing him how success didn't have to come at the expense of integrity. For 6 months, she had been his mentor, shaping his understanding of the business world. until the day she had suddenly resigned, leaving no forwarding address. Rumors suggested she had taken a stand against the firm's questionable practices and been forced out. Ethan had always meant to find her, to thank her for her guidance, but ambition and the relentless pace of climbing the corporate ladder had pushed those intentions aside, and now apparently she was gone. Ethan stood motionless before the grave, pieces falling into place. The woman must be Eleanor's daughter, which meant the little girl was her granddaughter. The resemblance was there, in the determined set of the jaw, the perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than others. His reverie was interrupted by a voice behind him. "She was your friend." Ethan turned to find the woman standing there, studying him with a measured gaze. Up close, the resemblance to Eleanor was even more striking. "She was my mentor," he replied honestly, "a lifetime ago." "She was my mother," the woman said. "I'm Sarah Thompson, and you're Ethan Blackwood. I recognized you from the business section." The direct acknowledgement caught him off guard. "You knew who I was yesterday?" Sarah nodded. "It's not every day a Wall Street tycoon gives away a watch worth more than a car to strangers in the park." Her tone wasn't accusatory, merely stating facts. The little girl had wandered back and now stood partially hidden behind her mother, curious eyes fixed on Ethan. "Your daughter has a gift," Ethan said, nodding toward the child. "Lily wants to be a pianist," Sarah responded, a hint of pride breaking through her reserve. "Like my mother was, before—" She trailed off, and in the silence Ethan felt the weight of unspoken struggles. "Have coffee with me," he found himself saying. "Please, I'd like to hear about Eleanor, about what happened after she left Wallace and Reed." Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if weighing invisible scales. "1 hour," she finally agreed. "There's a cafe near here where Lily can draw while we talk." As they walked together toward the cemetery exit, Ethan felt strangely off balance. The structured world where he controlled every variable was suddenly unfamiliar territory. For the first time in years, he was stepping into the unknown. Behind them, spring sunlight illuminated Eleanor's headstone, the simple granite a silent witness to connections none of them fully understood yet. The wildflowers the child had placed swayed gently in the breeze, bright spots of color against the solemn gray. The cafe near Greenwood Cemetery was a small family-owned establishment that seemed to exist in defiance of Brooklyn's rapid gentrification. The worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs spoke of a place that valued comfort over style. Lily settled at a corner table with her notebook, immediately absorbed in her drawings while Sarah and Ethan sat by the window. "Eleanor never told me much about her corporate life," Sarah began after ordering simple black coffee. "She reinvented herself as a piano teacher after leaving Manhattan. We lived modestly but happily in Park Slope." Ethan wrapped his hands around his untouched cappuccino. "She was brilliant. Everyone at Wallace and Reed knew she was destined for greatness. And yet she left it all behind," Sarah said, watching him closely. "Do you know why?" The directness of her question made Ethan uncomfortable. There were rumors, nothing concrete. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her eyes hardened slightly. She refused to sign off on a predatory loan package that would have bankrupted thousands of families while making the firm millions. When she threatened to go public, they constructed a file of fabricated compliance violations. She resigned rather than fight a battle she couldn't win against people with unlimited resources. The words hung between them, an implicit accusation. Ethan had heard whispers of this story years ago, but had dismissed them as sour grapes from someone who couldn't handle the pressure. "I was just starting out then," he said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "By the time I had any real influence, she was gone." "And yet you built your fortune using many of the same tactics," Sarah replied evenly. "Blackwood Enterprises is known for its aggressive acquisition strategies. 15 years ago, you gutted Harmony Music Publishers in a hostile takeover. 47 people lost their jobs, including my mother, who had found work in their sheet music division." The revelation struck Ethan like a physical blow. He remembered the Harmony acquisition, a straightforward business decision, adding their valuable catalog to Blackwood's growing media division. The personnel cuts had been necessary redundancies. He had never reviewed the names of those affected. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I never made these connections." "Why would you?" Sarah's voice wasn't unkind, merely realistic. "When you're making decisions that affect thousands, you don't see individual faces." From the corner, Lily's humming provided a gentle background to their conversation. The melody was complex, sophisticated beyond her years. "She has her grandmother's talent," Ethan observed, grateful for the shift in focus. Sarah's expression softened as she looked at her daughter, and her determination. "We've been staying at a women's shelter for the past 3 months, but Lily practices whenever she can find a piano. Community centers, churches that leave their doors open during the day. She never complains." Ethan's mind raced with questions. How had Eleanor Thompson's daughter ended up homeless? What series of events had led from a modest but stable life in Park Slope to a shelter? "What happened?" he asked finally. Sarah sipped her coffee before answering. "Life happened. I was a concert pianist with a promising career when I got pregnant with Lily. Her father disappeared when he found out. I took a teaching position at a small music school to support us, but then came the economic downturn. The school closed, and I picked up private students to make ends meet." She paused, the next part clearly difficult to vocalize. "When Mom got sick, I became her caregiver. Cancer. The medical bills took everything we had saved. After she was gone, I tried to rebuild, but then I developed tendonitis in both wrists." She flexed her hands unconsciously. "A pianist who can't play is, well, you adapt. I worked retail administrative jobs, whatever I could find. Then the apartment building was sold to developers. Our rent doubled overnight." Her matter-of-fact recounting of cascading hardships made Ethan acutely aware of the safety nets he had always taken for granted. "The watch," he said suddenly. "Why haven't you sold it? It would give you enough to secure housing, at least temporarily." Sarah held his gaze. "I'm not a charity case, Mr. Blackwood. I don't need grand gestures or guilt money. What Lily and I need is what everyone needs, a fair chance." Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Richard Hayes, his CFO. He hesitated, then declined the call. "You should take it," Sarah said. "I'm sure it's important." "It can wait." The words surprised Ethan. As much as they did Sarah, nothing waited in his world. Business always came first. Yet here he was, choosing coffee with strangers over the empire he had spent decades building. "Tell me about Lily's music," he said. Sarah's reserve melted slightly. "She composes intuitively. Never had formal training beyond what I could teach her, but she hears harmonies most adults struggle to grasp. The director at the community center says she's a prodigy. Have you looked into music schools, scholarships?" "Of course," Sarah replied, a hint of irritation in her voice. "But those opportunities go to children with connections, with access to years of private instruction. The playing field isn't level, Mr. Blackwood. Surely you know that." Ethan nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. His own success, while earned through hard work, had been built on foundations of privilege, the right schools, the right introductions, the safety net of family wealth to catch him if he failed. His phone buzzed again. This time he checked the screen and frowned. "I'm sorry, but I need to take this," he said, standing and moving toward the door. Outside on the sidewalk, Richard's voice was tense. "Ethan, where the hell are you? The SEC just contacted our legal team. They're launching an investigation into the Patterson merger. Someone's leaked documents suggesting we had insider information before making our offer." Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The Patterson deal had been clean, but there had been rumors around the office about early information. He had dismissed them, focusing on the results rather than the methods. "Call an emergency board meeting for this afternoon," he instructed. "I'll be there in an hour." When he returned to the table, Sarah was helping Lily put away her drawings. "I'm afraid I need to cut our conversation short," he said, reaching for his wallet. "A situation at work requires my attention." "Of course," Sarah replied, her polite mask slipping back into place. "Thank you for the coffee." Ethan hesitated, then pulled out a business card and wrote his personal number on the back. "Please take this if you need anything." Sarah looked at the card but didn't take it. "What is it you want, Mr. Blackwood? Absolution for past business decisions? The warm feeling of helping the less fortunate? I'm not interested in being anyone's redemption project." Her words cut through his practiced corporate veneer. What did he want? The question had never seemed relevant before. He had always moved forward, acquisition to acquisition, success to success, never looking back to question the path. "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but I'd like to find out." He placed the card on the table and took a step back. The offer stands, no strings attached. As he walked away, Ethan glanced back through the cafe window. Sarah was still sitting at the table, staring at his card, her expression unreadable. Lily had moved to sit beside her mother, leaning against her shoulder in a gesture of intuitive comfort. The simple tableau stayed with him as he hailed a taxi back to Manhattan, back to the crisis waiting at Blackwood Tower, back to the life that suddenly seemed hollow despite all its trappings of success. The next 6 weeks brought seismic shifts to Ethan Blackwood's carefully structured world. The SEC investigation into the Patterson merger expanded, revealing a pattern of questionable practices within Blackwood Enterprises that stretched back years. Though Ethan himself wasn't directly implicated, the culture he had fostered, where results mattered more than methods, had created an environment where ethical corners were routinely cut. The board, once deferential to his every decision, demanded his temporary step back while internal investigations were conducted. His COO, Victoria Wayland, a protégé whom he had personally mentored, led the charge, citing her fiduciary duty to shareholders. The betrayal stung more than Ethan cared to admit. On a Wednesday morning in late May, Ethan found himself in the unfamiliar position of having nowhere to be. No meetings demanded his presence, no crisis required his decisions. The penthouse, apartment on Fifth Avenue, usually just a place to sleep between workdays, suddenly felt cavernous and empty. His thoughts returned repeatedly to Sarah and Lily Thompson. He had tried calling the community center near Greenwood Cemetery, but was told they couldn't give out information about shelter residents. His inquiries hit walls of privacy protections, ironically, the same kind of barriers he had often used to shield his own activities from scrutiny. Unable to settle, Ethan decided to visit Brooklyn Heights, a neighborhood where Eleanor had once mentioned living. He had no real plan beyond walking the streets she might have walked, perhaps understanding better the life she had chosen over corporate success. The tree-lined streets with their historic brownstones presented a stark contrast to the glass and steel of his Manhattan world. Families strolled along the promenade overlooking the East River, street musicians played on corners, and neighborhood cafes buzzed with conversation rather than business deals. Ethan paused before a small music shop, with weathered painted notes decorating its windows. The sign above read, "Harmony Notes," in faded blue letters. On impulse, he entered, a small bell announcing his arrival. Inside, the walls were lined with instruments, guitars, violins, and a row of electronic keyboards. The air smelled of wood polish and old paper. A few customers browsed sheet music in the back, while a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair adjusted a display of woodwind reeds. "Can I help you find something?" the man asked, approaching with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'm just looking," Ethan replied. "I used to play piano years ago." It wasn't entirely a lie. His mother had insisted on lessons through his childhood, though he had abandoned the practice once business school consumed his life. "We have a beautiful selection of sheet music," the man offered. "Classical, jazz, contemporary, whatever your preference." Actually, Ethan found himself saying, "I'm interested in piano education for children, specifically opportunities for talented kids who might not have access to formal training." The man, Daniel, according to his name tag, studied Ethan with renewed interest. "You teach?" No, Ethan clarified quickly. "I'm exploring options for supporting music education. Are there programs in this area for children who show promise but lack resources?" Daniel's expression brightened. Absolutely. I run one myself, in fact, the Brooklyn Music Initiative. We provide instruments, lessons, and performance opportunities to kids from underserved communities. He gestured toward the back of the store. Come to my office, I'll show you what we're doing. Ethan followed, surprising himself with his genuine interest. Daniel's cramped office was plastered with children's artwork, thank you cards and photos of smiling kids holding instruments. A stark contrast to Ethan's minimalist executive suite with its awards and business magazine covers. We started 12 years ago with just 5 students, Daniel explained, pulling out a folder of program materials. Now we serve over 200 across Brooklyn. Our waiting list is twice that number. Why the waiting list? Ethan asked, scanning the brochure Daniel handed him. Funding, space instruments, teachers, take your pick, Daniel replied with a rueful smile. We operate on grants, donations, and volunteer hours. Every dollar goes directly to the programs, but there's never enough. Ethan thought of the millions Blackwood Enterprises spent annually on corporate retreats and client entertainment. What would it take to expand, to reach every child on that waiting list? Daniel laughed softly. A miracle. About $500,000 would transform what we do, secure a permanent space, hire full-time teachers, provide instruments that aren't held together with tape and hope. I might know someone who would be interested in making that kind of investment, Ethan said carefully. Daniel's expression turned skeptical. We've heard promises before, Mr. Blackwood, Ethan Blackwood. Recognition dawned in Daniel's eyes. From Blackwood Enterprises, the investment firm? Ethan nodded, preparing for the usual response, either fawning interest in his wealth or thinly veiled hostility toward what he represented. Instead, Daniel simply asked, "Why music education, Mr. Blackwood? Why now?" The directness of the question deserved an honest answer. I recently met a young girl with extraordinary musical talent. Her circumstances don't match her potential. It made me wonder how many others there are like her. Daniel nodded slowly. They're everywhere. Talent doesn't discriminate by zip code or bank balance. Opportunity does. If I wanted to fund a scholarship program, something immediate while considering larger support, how would that work? Ethan asked. For the next hour, they discussed possibilities. By the time Ethan left the store, he had committed to funding 10 full scholarships and had scheduled a meeting with the initiative's board to discuss broader support. The decision felt right in a way that few business transactions ever had. Across Brooklyn, in the Williamsburg neighborhood, Sarah Thompson arrived at the Armstrong Music Conservatory for her afternoon cleaning shift. The prestigious private music school occupied a renovated factory building, its interior transformed into state-of-the-art practice rooms and performance spaces. To the students who arrived in luxury SUVs for their lessons, Sarah was invisible, just another maintenance worker polishing the surfaces of their privileged world. Mrs. Rivera called in sick, her supervisor informed her. You'll need to cover the practice rooms on the 3rd floor in addition to your usual areas. Sarah nodded, adjusting her cleaning cart. The extra work meant potentially missing her appointment at the housing assistant's office, but she couldn't afford to lose this job. After 3 months, they had finally left the shelter, moving to a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with rent assistance that required her to maintain at least 30 hours of employment weekly. The 3rd floor was quieter than the main teaching areas, home to advanced practice rooms where serious students prepared for competitions and auditions. As Sarah cleaned, she heard fragments of Chopin, Bach, and Debussy filtering through the soundproof doors. In the last room, grand piano gleaming under recessed lights, she allowed herself a moment of indulgence. Glancing over her shoulder to ensure she was alone, Sarah set down her cleaning supplies and approached the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, remembering. Gently, she pressed a C major chord, the rich tone filling the room. The music called to her. Before she could reconsider, Sarah sat on the bench and began to play. She chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, her fingers finding the familiar patterns despite years of disuse. The tendinitis in her wrists flared with warning pain, but she continued, losing herself in the music's gentle flow. When she finished, applause startled her to her feet. A distinguished older man stood in the doorway, his crisp suit and formal bearing marking him as someone important. "That was extraordinarily beautiful," he said. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Robert Harrington, the director of Armstrong." Sarah flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I'm with the cleaning service. I'll get back to work immediately." "Please don't apologize for that performance," Robert said, entering the room. "Where did you train? Your interpretation was quite remarkable." "Juilliard," Sarah admitted reluctantly. "A lifetime ago." Robert's eyebrows rose. "And now you're cleaning our practice rooms. There's clearly a story there." Sarah hesitated, then offered the simplified version. "Life took a different turn. I have a daughter to support, and playing professionally is no longer an option." She flexed her hands unconsciously. "Tendinitis," Robert guessed, noticing the gesture. Sarah nodded. "Bilateral, career-ending according to 3 specialists." "For performance, perhaps," Robert acknowledged. "But there are other paths in music. We're actually searching for a teaching assistant for our junior program. The pay isn't exceptional, but it includes benefits and would utilize your training." Sarah stared at him, suspicion mingling with hope. "You don't know anything about my qualifications beyond 5 minutes of Debussy." "True," Robert agreed, "but I know talent and proper training when I hear it. Bring your resume tomorrow." "I make no promises, but I'd like to speak with you more formally." After he left, Sarah stood motionless beside the piano, emotions warring within her. The unexpected opportunity felt like a fragile bubble that might burst if examined too closely. Yet she couldn't help but wonder if, after years of perseverance through mounting hardships, her luck might finally be changing. That evening, Lily pored over music theory worksheets at their small kitchen table, exercises Sarah had created using paper from Lily's school. Their apartment was sparsely furnished, a futon couch that converted to Sarah's bed at night, a single mattress for Lily in the tiny bedroom, and mismatched kitchenware donated by the Shelter Outreach Program. "Mom, listen to this," Lily said, humming a complex melody. "I heard it while you were at work. The man upstairs was practicing his saxophone." Sarah smiled, recognizing a jazz standard she hadn't heard in years. Lily's ability to perfectly reproduce music after a single hearing never ceased to amaze. "Her? That's Round Midnight by Thelonious Monk," she explained. "A jazz classic." "I like how it sounds sad, but not really sad," Lily said thoughtfully. "Like remembering something you miss but are still happy you had." The insightful comment, so mature for an 8-year-old, reminded Sarah of her mother. Eleanor had possessed the same ability to articulate the emotional essence of music. A knock at their door interrupted the moment. Sarah approached cautiously. They knew no one in this building yet, and unexpected visitors rarely brought good news in her experience. Through the peephole, she saw a teenage boy holding a large envelope. Opening the door partway, security chain still engaged, she asked, "Can I help you?" "Package for Lily Thompson," the boy said, seeming nervous. "I'm supposed to deliver it directly to her." "Who sent you?" Sarah asked, suspicion rising. "The Brooklyn Music Initiative," he replied. "I volunteer there. Mr. Coleman asked me to bring this personally and wait for a response." Sarah had never heard of the organization. "What is it?" "It's a scholarship invitation," the boy explained, "for the summer program and fall semester. All the information is inside. It's legit, I promise. I'm in the program too." Cautiously, Sarah accepted the envelope, thanked the boy, and closed the door. Inside the heavy paper package, she found an official letter addressed to Lily, inviting her to audition for a full scholarship to the initiative's intensive music education program. Accompanying materials detailed a comprehensive curriculum, instruments provided, weekly private lessons, and ensemble opportunities. Most puzzling was the personalized note, paper-clipped to the application. "Ms. Thompson, your daughter's musical gift deserves nurturing. This scholarship was recently established for children with exceptional talent. The audition is a formality. The sponsorship is already secured. Please consider this opportunity. Respectfully, Daniel Coleman, Director." Sarah stared at the materials, suspicion coiling through her initial excitement. How did they know about Lily, who had established this convenient scholarship? The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Only one name came to mind: Ethan Blackwood. Sarah had deliberately left his business card on the cafe table weeks ago, refusing to be indebted to a man whose business practices had contributed to her mother's professional downfall. Yet now it seemed he had found another way to insert himself into their lives. "What is it, Mom?" Lily asked, noticing her mother's conflicted expression. Sarah took a deep breath. Her pride warred with practical reality. This was exactly the opportunity Lily needed, the kind that Sarah had been searching for without success. Did it matter where it came from? "It's an invitation," she said finally, handing the letter to her daughter. "For you to study music. Real lessons with real teachers." Lily's eyes widened as she scanned the colorful brochure. "Can I go, please?" Looking at her daughter's hopeful expression, Sarah made her decision. She would accept this opportunity for Lily, but she would also find Ethan Blackwood and make the terms of this arrangement crystal clear. Her daughter was not a charity case or a path to redemption. If he wanted to help, there would be boundaries. "Yes," she told Lily, managing a smile. "You can audition, but first, I need to make a phone call." Summer descended on New York with oppressive heat that transformed the city's concrete landscape into a shimmering mirage. While most of Manhattan's elite retreated to the Hamptons or European vacations, Ethan Blackwood remained, though not by choice. The continuing investigation into Blackwood Enterprises had frozen his assets and restricted his travel. His temporary removal from operational control had been made permanent by a board vote led by Victoria Wayland, who publicly positioned herself as the ethical reformer the company needed. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. Victoria had been his most enthusiastic supporter of the very strategies now under scrutiny. The business world's hypocrisy, once a tool he wielded masterfully, had turned against him with equal precision. His attorney had advised a low profile while they negotiated a settlement with the SEC, which explained why Ethan found himself sitting on a folding chair in the back room of Harmony Notes music store on a sweltering July afternoon, watching a group of children prepare for their summer showcase. Daniel Coleman moved through the cramped space, adjusting a violinist's elbow here, offering encouragement to a nervous cellist there. The Brooklyn Music Initiative's summer program was in full swing, expanded significantly by Ethan's anonymous donation. 40 children from across Brooklyn's diverse neighborhoods gathered 3 times weekly for instruction, practice, and the pure joy of creating music together. At the upright piano in the corner sat Lily Thompson, her small fingers moving confidently across the keys as she accompanied a flautist practicing Mozart. Her natural talent, honed by 6 weeks of intensive training, had blossomed remarkably. Already she was advancing through material meant for students years older. From his unobtrusive position near the back wall, Ethan watched the transformation that occurred when Lily played. The serious, thoughtful child became luminous, as though the music flowing through her fingers illuminated her from within. It reminded him painfully of Vanessa, his late wife, whose passion for the arts had once been the counterbalance to his business-focused intensity. "She's extraordinary, isn't she?" The voice beside him belonged to Sarah Thompson, who had slipped into the room unnoticed. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple blouse and skirt that Ethan recognized as the unofficial uniform of the Armstrong Conservatory staff. The teaching assistant position had materialized into reality, providing Sarah with stable employment that respected her musical background. "Beyond extraordinary," Ethan agreed quietly. "Daniel says she's the most gifted student he's encountered in 20 years of teaching." Sarah nodded, pride momentarily overshadowing the careful distance she maintained in their infrequent interactions. Over the past 2 months, they had established an uneasy truce. Sarah had accepted Lily's scholarship after confirming that her daughter was not receiving special treatment, while Ethan had respected her boundaries, never mentioning his ongoing financial support of the initiative. "Robert Harrington heard her play yesterday when she came to meet me after work," Sarah said. "He's offered her a partial scholarship to Armstrong's junior program in the fall." Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's quite an honor. Armstrong rarely admits students without years of formal training. It's an incredible opportunity, Sarah acknowledged, but still only partial. The remaining tuition plus books, mandatory recital attire, transportation. She trailed off, the familiar calculations of financial impossibility evident in her expression. Ethan knew better than to offer direct assistance. Their tentative connection existed only because he had channeled his help through established organizations rather than personal charity. Sarah's fierce independence remained intact despite the gradual improvements in their circumstances. The initiative offers scholarship continuation for exceptional students advancing to partner institutions, he said carefully. Armstrong is on that list. It might be worth discussing with Daniel. Sarah gave him a knowing look. Partner institutions. A program that coincidentally began after your involvement with the initiative. Ethan didn't deny it. Efficiency and philanthropy is just good business. The hint of a smile touched Sarah's lips before disappearing. Progress, however small. Their conversation paused as Daniel called the students to attention, organizing them for a run-through of the showcase finale. Parents and siblings began filtering in for the afternoon rehearsal, filling the remaining chairs. Among them was Victoria Wayland, whose nephew played clarinet in the ensemble. Her presence at community music events was a recent development, part of her image rehabilitation campaign, as she positioned herself as Blackwood Enterprises' compassionate new leader. Her expertly tailored casual wear and carefully arranged, candid photos with her nephew's family had already appeared in several business publications, profiling her leadership style. When she spotted Ethan, surprise flashed across her face before being replaced with practiced poise. She made her way toward him as the children began playing. "Ethan, this is unexpected," she said, her voice pitched low enough not to disturb. The performance but warm enough to appear friendly to any observing eyes. "Hello, Victoria," he replied neutrally. "Your nephew has improved considerably since the spring showcase." Victoria smiled with practiced warmth. "Tyler's quite committed. Unlike his approach to soccer or karate, music seems to have staying power." Her gaze wandered to Sarah, a question in her eyes. "Victoria, this is Sarah Thompson," Ethan said, making the introduction with deliberate formality. "Ms. Thompson teaches at Armstrong Conservatory. Her daughter Lily is the pianist accompanying the ensemble." Victoria extended her hand. "Lovely to meet you. That's your daughter. She's remarkably talented." Sarah shook her hand briefly. "Thank you. If you'll excuse me, I should help Daniel with the program notes." As Sarah moved away, Victoria took the vacant seat beside Ethan. "I didn't realize you had connections in Brooklyn's music education. Community," she said, her tone casual but her attention sharp. "Is this a recent interest?" "Not recent, no," Ethan replied, thinking of Vanessa and her passion for supporting young artists. "Just one I haven't had much time to pursue until recently." Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped lightly against her knee. "The board is meeting next week to discuss settlement terms with the SEC. Your presence would be helpful in facilitating a clean resolution." "My presence or my signature on whatever agreement shields the company while making me the sole scapegoat?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice even as the children continued playing. Victoria had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. "The company needs to move forward, Ethan. The market has responded positively to our new transparency initiatives. Initiatives I proposed 3 years ago, as I recall, before being told they would unnecessarily constrain our competitive edge." "Thuan," Barb found its mark. Victoria's smile tightened. "People change, priorities evolve." "Indeed they do," Ethan agreed, watching Lily guide the younger flautist through a difficult passage with gentle patience. "Sometimes for the better." Further conversation was prevented by the conclusion of the piece, followed by enthusiastic applause from the assembled parents. Daniel stepped forward to make announcements about the upcoming showcase, and Victoria excused herself to speak with her nephew. As the rehearsal broke up, Ethan noticed a tense exchange between Lily and 2 older students near the refreshment table. Though he couldn't hear their words, Their body language and Lily's suddenly withdrawn posture told a familiar story. The social dynamics of privilege meeting talent without pedigree remained consistent across all worlds, even children's. Sarah noticed too, moving quickly to her daughter's side with the practiced calm of a mother, accustomed to navigating difficult social waters. Ethan watched as she spoke quietly to Lily, whose shoulders gradually relaxed. The resilience they both displayed in the face of subtle exclusion struck him deeply. "Your protégé has quite the supportive mother," Daniel said, appearing at Ethan's side as the room gradually emptied. "She's not my protégé," Ethan corrected mildly. "Just a remarkably talented child deserving of opportunity." Daniel gave him a knowing look. "The Armstrong connection is significant. Robert Harrington doesn't offer scholarships lightly, especially to students without the usual background." Sarah mentioned it was only partial. "Yes, and even that partial amount is beyond most families' reach," Daniel sighed. "Armstrong produces exceptional musicians, but its traditional model caters to a very specific demographic." Ethan considered this. What if there were a dedicated fund for students transitioning from community programs like yours, not just covering tuition, but the full experience, proper instruments, attire, transportation, even family support services? Daniel's eyes widened. That would transform the pipeline. But we're talking about a substantial endowment, not just a one-time donation. "I'm aware," Ethan replied. "Draw up a proposal, be ambitious but practical." After Daniel moved away to help the last departing students, Ethan found himself alone in the room, save for Sarah, who was organizing sheet music at the piano where Lily had played. "The other children," Ethan said quietly, "they were unkind to Lily." Sarah paused, not looking up. "They informed her that charity cases don't belong at Armstrong. Apparently their parents have discussed the new diversity scholarship at dinner." The casual cruelty hit Ethan like a physical blow. In his corporate world, such prejudice was carefully disguised behind coded language and procedural barriers. The children's direct approach was almost refreshing in its honesty, if infinitely more painful for its target. "What did you tell her?" he asked. Sarah straightened the music with careful precision. "That Eleanor Roosevelt said no one can make you feel inferior without your consent, that her talent speaks for itself, that pioneers always face resistance." She finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "All the things my mother told me when I was the scholarship student at Juilliard, surrounded by children with generations of privilege and connections." "Did it help?" "It never stops hurting," Sarah admitted. "But you learn to use it as fuel rather than allowing it to extinguish your flame." The intimate honesty of her response created a moment of genuine connection between them. Ethan thought of his own path, the scholarship boy at Princeton whose wrong accent and off-the-rack suits had marked him as an outsider among legacy admissions. He had responded by outworking, outmaneuvering, and ultimately out-earning them all, transforming himself into what they valued most: success at any cost. "I found something yesterday," Sarah said, breaking the silence and reaching into her bag. While cleaning out some boxes from storage, she withdrew a faded photograph and handed it to him. The image showed a group of musicians posed with instruments on the steps of what appeared to be a community center. Front and center was a much younger Eleanor Thompson seated at a portable keyboard, her smile radiant. Behind her stood a tall man with his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "My father," Ethan said quietly, recognizing the face he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. "James Blackwood." Sarah nodded. They played in the same community orchestra in Queens. "Before either of their careers took off, my mother kept this photo all her life." Ethan stared at the image, memories rearranging themselves into new patterns. His father, a talented saxophonist who had abandoned his musical aspirations for a stable career in finance. The records he would play late at night in his study, jazz standards that young Ethan would fall asleep listening to through the wall. The wistful way he spoke of the old days when Ethan would ask about the instrument case gathering dust in the closet. "They were friends," he said, more statement than question. "More than friends, I believe," Sarah replied quietly. "There are letters, He was offered a touring position with a prominent jazz ensemble. He chose his family and financial security instead. The revelation landed with the weight of decades of unspoken history. "And my father taught you?" "Briefly, before his health declined. He would visit occasionally when I was young, bring sheet music, listen to me play. I didn't understand the connection then. My mother simply called him an old friend." Ethan's mind raced. His father's insistence on his piano lessons despite Ethan's resistance, the unexpected emotion when Ethan had announced his acceptance to business school, the jazz records that became more frequent in the year after Eleanor's name had appeared in the obituaries. "Why are you showing me this now?" he asked. Sarah took a deep breath. "Because Lily has your father's ears. The way she tilts her head when listening to complex harmonies, it's exactly like the old photos of James. And because I'm tired of fighting connections that seem determined to form despite my resistance." Before Ethan could respond, Lily bounded back into the room, her earlier upset apparently forgotten in childish resilience. "Mom, Ms. Victoria wants to talk to you about something important," she announced. "She says it's about an opportunity." Sarah's expression turned wary. What kind of opportunity? "Something about a special concert at her company. For important people. She wants to know if I can play and if you can help organize it." Lily's excitement was evident. "She says it could help lots of kids like me get scholarships." Sarah and Ethan exchanged a look of shared understanding. Victoria's strategic mind was always working, and she had clearly identified a new angle for her image rehabilitation campaign, one that conveniently leveraged Lily's talent and potential connection to Ethan. "Tell Miss Victoria I'll speak with her in a moment," Sarah said calmly. After Lily left, Sarah turned to Ethan. "Your former protégé moves quickly." "Victoria sees opportunities everywhere," Ethan replied neutrally. "It's what made her an effective executive. And is using my daughter as a prop in corporate. Image rehabilitation an opportunity I should embrace?" The question held no bitterness, only a practical assessment. Ethan considered carefully. "Victoria manipulates, but she also delivers. If she promises exposure and support for the program, she'll provide it. The positive publicity for herself is merely a bonus." Sarah nodded. Decision made. "Then I'll hear her proposal. For Lily, and for the other children who deserve the same chances." As they walked together toward the front of the store where Victoria waited, Ethan felt a subtle shift in their relationship. The shared photograph had altered something fundamental between them, creating a connection that transcended their initial roles of benefactor and recipient. The complex legacy of Eleanor Thompson and James Blackwood had entangled their lives long before that chance meeting in Bryant Park. "The watch," Ethan said suddenly. "My grandfather's Rolex. What did you do with it?" Sarah glanced at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I kept it. Not to sell or to use, but as a reminder." "Of what?" "That unexpected kindness still exists in the world, even from unlikely sources." The autumn transformation of Brooklyn's Prospect Park created a canvas of crimson and gold that mirrored the setting sun. 3 months had passed since the summer showcase, bringing changes as profound as the shifting seasons. Ethan Blackwood stood at the edge of the park's long meadow, watching preparations for the inaugural Community Music Festival, an event that had evolved from Victoria's proposed corporate concert into something far more meaningful. White tents dotted the landscape, housing everything from instrument-petting zoos for curious toddlers to masterclasses led by professional musicians from across the city. 4 performance stages featured rotating ensembles from community music programs. Throughout the 5 boroughs, food vendors representing Brooklyn's diverse neighborhoods offered specialties that filled the air with enticing aromas. The festival was the public launch of the Thompson Blackwood Music Access Initiative, a foundation created through an unlikely partnership. After months of legal battles, Ethan had negotiated a settlement with the SEC that allowed him to retain a significant portion of his assets while stepping away from Blackwood Enterprises permanently. Victoria remained CEO, but the board had accepted Ethan's condition for his cooperation: a substantial corporate donation to seed the new foundation. "Impressive turnout," Daniel Coleman commented, joining Ethan as they watched families stream. Through the festival entrance. The online registration maxed out 3 days ago. We had to arrange for overflow parking at the Brooklyn Museum. Sarah's community connections made all the difference, Ethan replied. The transition from concept to reality had been largely due to Sarah's ability to unite diverse neighborhood organizations under a common vision. Her years of struggling within the system had given her insights no corporate consultant could match. Speaking of Sarah, Daniel said, she's looking for you. Something about the Greenwood Cemetery Youth Orchestra, needing their final sound check before Lily's performance. Ethan nodded and made his way through the festival grounds. Volunteers in bright blue t-shirts, many of them Armstrong Conservatory. Students fulfilling community service requirements, directed visitors and answered questions. The initiative's logo, a stylized musical note incorporating elements of a bridge, adorned banners and programs throughout the park. Near the main stage, Ethan found Sarah deep in conversation with Robert Harrington. The past months had seen her transition from teaching assistant to Armstrong's new Director of Community Partnerships, a position created specifically to bridge the gap between the elite conservatory and neighborhood music programs. There you are, Sarah said, spotting him. The cemetery orchestra is ready for their sound check, but we have a small situation with the piano. The rental company sent an upright instead of the baby grand we specified, Robert explained, his British accent more pronounced in moments of stress. Completely unacceptable for Lily's Chopin, but they claim to have no alternatives available on short notice. What about the Steinway from Armstrong's recital hall? Ethan suggested. Robert shook his head. It would take hours to transport and properly tune in this environment. The temperature fluctuations alone. I might have a solution, Ethan said, pulling out his phone. Give me 15 minutes. As he stepped away to make the call, Ethan reflected on how naturally he had settled into his role within the initiative. After years of corporate maneuvering, where relationships were merely strategic assets, the authenticity of this community had initially felt foreign. Yet the skills that had made him a formidable CEO, problem-solving, resource allocation, strategic thinking, found new application in service rather than profit. His call complete, Ethan returned to the stage area where the youth orchestra, a recently formed ensemble of talented students from neighborhoods surrounding Greenwood Cemetery, was practicing their opening number. Among the violinists, he recognized the boy who had delivered Lily's scholarship invitation months earlier. The comprehensive support provided by the initiative had transformed not just individual lives, but entire community dynamics. It's arranged, Ethan informed Sarah and Robert. Patterson's Music is sending over their showroom's Yamaha Grand. The owner owed me a favor from years ago. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Another convenient connection? Business wasn't all cutthroat. Acquisitions, Ethan replied with a slight smile. Some relationships were actually built on mutual respect. The piano will be here in 20 minutes, he continued. They're sending their best technician to handle setup and tuning. Sarah nodded gratefully. Perfect. That gives us time to check on Lily. She's been uncharacteristically quiet this morning. They found Lily in the performer's tent, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress, her first proper recital attire, purchased with her Armstrong scholarship funds. She sat alone on a folding chair, eyes closed, fingers moving silently through the passages of her piece. Mental practice, Sarah explained softly. A technique my mother taught me. Lily opened her eyes at the sound of her mother's voice. Is it time? Not yet, sweetheart. The piano is being changed. You'll have the proper instrument for your piece. Relief washed over Lily's face. At 9 years old, her musical sensitivity had developed to the point where the quality of an instrument profoundly affected her performance. Will there be a lot of people? She asked, nervousness creeping into her voice. Quite a few, Ethan answered honestly, but they're here because they love music just like you do. Lily nodded, absorbing this. Ms. Victoria says important people from the news will be watching, that I'm representing all the kids in the program. Ethan and Sarah exchanged a glance, recognizing Victoria's characteristic pressure tactics. While her support had been instrumental in the initiative's rapid growth, Her methods sometimes prioritized results over individual well-being. Sarah knelt beside her daughter. "You're representing only yourself, Lily. Your music is your voice, nothing more and nothing less." "Your grandmother once told me something similar," Ethan added, surprising himself with the memory. "She said that true music isn't performed. It's shared, like opening a window to let others glimpse something beautiful you've discovered." Lily considered this, then smiled. "I like that. It makes it less scary." As they left Lily to her preparation, Sarah gave Ethan a curious look. "You never mentioned that my mother said that to you." "I'd forgotten until just now," he admitted. "It was during a particularly stressful period at Wallace & Reed. I was pulling all-nighters, obsessed with proving myself. Eleanor found me alone in the office at midnight, practically vibrating with anxiety over a presentation. She took me to the building's rooftop garden. I didn't even know it existed, where someone had abandoned an old upright piano. Despite being horribly out of tune, she played Debussy's Clair de Lune under the actual moonlight. That's when she said those words to me." Sarah's eyes softened. That sounds exactly like her. Their moment of shared remembrance was interrupted by the festival coordinator announcing the piano's arrival. For the next hour, they were absorbed in logistical details: the piano placement, sound system adjustments, program timing. The collaborative ease they had developed over recent months made their partnership remarkably efficient. By mid-afternoon, the festival was in full swing. The main stage area had filled to capacity for the youth orchestra performance featuring Lily's solo. In the front row sat Daniel Coleman and the Brooklyn Music Initiative students. Behind them, Armstrong Conservatory faculty and students mixed, with community members and families from across the city. Victoria Wayland arrived with a small entourage, including photographers and a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, who was preparing a feature on corporate philanthropy. She greeted Ethan with professional courtesy, their former mentor-protégé, relationship now rebalanced into a more distant but functional connection. "Congratulations, Ethan," she said, gesturing to the festival around them. "This is unexpected but impressive." "Thank you for Blackwood Enterprises' continued support," he replied diplomatically. Both knew the corporate sponsorship was primarily a strategic image decision, but the resulting funds had real impact regardless of motivation. "Our foundation committee is considering renewing the grant for next year," Victoria informed him. "The board has been pleased with the positive press." Before Ethan could respond, the orchestra conductor stepped onto the stage, and the audience fell silent. The young musicians performed admirably, their months of dedicated practice evident in their cohesive sound. When it came time for Lily's solo, she walked to the gleaming grand piano with composed dignity that belied her age. Her performance, of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, silenced even the restless children in the audience. The piece, normally played with romantic melancholy, acquired a different quality in Lily's interpretation, a hopefulness that transformed the composition without betraying its essence. Even those without musical training could sense the unique voice she brought to the familiar work. When she finished, the applause was immediate and genuine. Sarah, watching from the wings, wiped tears from her eyes. Beside her, Ethan felt a profound sense of rightness that had eluded him throughout his business successes. The remainder of the festival unfolded like a celebration, not just of music, but of community itself. As evening approached, the final event brought all participating ensembles together for a collaborative performance of an original piece commissioned specifically for the occasion. The composer, a former student of Eleanor's who had gone on to success in film scoring, had created a work that allowed musicians of all skill levels to contribute meaningfully. After the final notes faded and the appreciative crowd began dispersing, Ethan found Sarah sitting alone on a bench near the now quiet main stage, watching the cleanup crews begin their work. "Lily's performance was extraordinary," he said, joining her. "Eleanor would have been proud." "Yes," Sarah agreed softly, "and your father too, I think." The mention of James Blackwood no longer carried the awkwardness it once had. The discovery of their parents' connection had gradually evolved from surprising coincidence to meaningful foundation for their own relationship. Sarah reached into her bag and withdrew a familiar object, the Rolex watch Ethan had impulsively given her that spring day in Bryant Park. "I think it's time this returned to you," she said, holding it out. Ethan made no move to take it. "You kept it all this time?" "As I told you, it was a reminder. Not of what we lacked, but of unexpected possibility." She placed it on the bench between them. "But now we have better reminders of that." Ethan picked up the watch, feeling its familiar weight. The family heirloom that had once represented his connection to wealth and status now carried different associations. "What would you think about auctioning it?" he suggested. "The proceeds could fund next year's scholarship for a student like Lily." Sarah's smile conveyed both surprise and approval. "I think that would be perfect." As twilight deepened around them, they discussed plans for the initiative's expansion. The success of the festival had generated interest from music programs across the East Coast, and preliminary discussions were underway with similar organizations in Chicago and Los Angeles. Victoria mentioned that Armstrong is considering creating a sister campus in the Bronx, Sarah said. "It would make the conservatory experience accessible to an entirely new community. And give Robert Harrington the empire expansion he's always wanted," Ethan added with a knowing smile. The conservatory director's ambition had proven unexpectedly valuable in advancing their accessibility goals. Their conversation was interrupted by Lily, who approached with a small group of young musicians from various ensembles. "Mom, can we play one more piece, just for ourselves?" she asked. "We've been practicing something special." Sarah nodded, curious. "Of course, sweetheart." The children gathered around a small portable keyboard set up near the bench. Lily took the lead, explaining quietly to her new friends. Then, without fanfare, they began to play what Ethan recognized as a simplified arrangement of Round Midnight, the Thelonious Monk jazz standard that had been one of his father's favorites. The spontaneous performance, free from the pressure of audience expectations, showcased the pure joy of musical collaboration. Watching these children from vastly different backgrounds finding harmony together embodied everything the initiative strived to achieve. As the final notes faded, Sarah reached over and squeezed Ethan's hand briefly. The gesture, simple but meaningful, acknowledged how far they had come from that chance encounter in the park, from strangers divided by circumstance to partners united by shared purpose. Later that evening, as festival lights were being dismantled and the park returned to its natural tranquility, Ethan found himself walking with Sarah and Lily toward the subway station. Their path took them past a small jazz club where the sounds of a saxophone drifted through open doors. The familiar melody stopped all three of them in their tracks. "That's Grandma's favorite song," Lily said, recognizing the piece from Eleanor's old recordings. "And my father's," Ethan added quietly. They stood together for a moment, listening to the music that had connected their families across generations. In that simple moment of shared appreciation, Ethan recognized what his years of corporate achievement had never provided: the sense of belonging to something larger than himself, something built on authentic connection rather than strategic advantage. The Thompson-Blackwood Music Access Initiative would continue to evolve, facing challenges and celebrating successes, but its true significance lay not in impressive statistics or publicity features, but in moments like this, a child hearing music that connected her to a legacy greater than herself, communities finding common ground through shared creative expression, and two people discovering that the most meaningful journeys often begin with the simplest of human connections. As autumn leaves danced around them in the gentle evening breeze, Ethan realized that the impulsive gift of his watch, a moment of uncharacteristic generosity, amid his carefully controlled existence, had begun a transformation he could never have anticipated. In giving away a symbol of his success, he had inadvertently opened himself to receiving something far more valuable: the opportunity to rediscover his own humanity. And Sarah, in initially refusing his charity but ultimately accepting connection, had found that independence and interdependence could coexist within the same resilient spirit. Her mother's legacy lived on not just in Lily's music, but in the expanding circles of opportunity that would benefit generations of young musicians. Together, They continued their walk toward the subway, 3 separate journeys now intertwined by chance, choice, and the universal language of music that had spoken to their families across time, circumstance, and the artificial boundaries of social division.